Hello and welcome to the trade setup. In this video we are looking at OKLO. It is time for another update, and today we'll be discussing the failure to hold here an internal area of support that we provided in the previous video, as well as the implications of the more direct movement to the downside for the overall pattern that we are tracking within this area. But before we get there, I would like to go quickly through the larger time frame for any of you who might be new. And here we are tracking a larger leading diagonal to be forming, so overall we are tracking an active uptrend, and here we have an initial wave 1 up, a wave 2 down, and now within the wave 3 to the upside we are tracking this structure within this ABC movement, for which we have the area of support for the wave B at the levels between the $77.7 all the way down to the $29.7 level. Now, I provided you this in many of the previous videos, but the overall target for the wave 3 to the upside remains the same, the 138.2% extension of the wave 1, which is around the $482.5 level. And this remains a valid scenario, especially as long as we don't break here below the last level of support, the $29.7 level. And although this area is interesting from a large time frame perspective and possible to be used even for an accumulation perspective, it is not a trade setup. This area is not here to provide us necessarily a trade setup, because we do not have here a larger reliable structure to the upside. Yeah, we have failed a couple of videos ago, probably, I don't remember exactly in which video, but we did fail here to hold a larger area of support for a larger, even more bullish interpretation, in which we were tracking an impulse, and we were able to tell quite early that this structure would extend even further to the downside once we have broken here the $109 level with a sustained break. And sure, we also had here this trend line to signal to us an active uptrend. Yeah, we did find support and it allowed further continuation higher, and it was the beginning of actually all of these larger swings to the upside. But the Elliott wave theory actually managed to warn us much earlier that this structure is likely not going to manage to hold once again and extend higher. Yeah, for the Elliott wave theory, we had here the 50% retracement for wave 4 around the $109 level. For the trend line, it was really only once we have broken here below around the, the $91 level, that we actually got the signal that this structure, this uptrend, is not going to manage to extend in a more direct fashion. And this is not to say that every single time the Elliott wave theory will manage to provide the signal before the trend line. Yeah, many of the times we actually use the trend line for an even earlier signal, but this is one of the cases that, yeah, once we have broken here the trend line, we even have a resistance trend line to be reused. Yeah, it was basically tested from below, and even though we managed to get a break above it once again, I did provide you in the previous video this area of support for continuation higher within a larger pattern to the upside. And once we broke here once again the area of support, we did not manage to hold even the trend line afterwards, and it was a signal once we had here the sustained break that this structure was not going to hold. Surely enough, it did also have some testing done in this area, and I would have preferred here a direct continuation higher within the wave 3, but even if I were to consider here this larger wave 3 already done, it would actually only line up even better the actual lows within these swings. Yeah, we had here a couple of reactions to the upside from this last level of support. And this is all just to showcase how much relevance the Elliott wave theory actually has on these charts, and how we should actually continue to be tracking these structures. Now, since we did fail to hold this area of support, sure, we broke below the trend line once again, and we have continued in this green interpretation that I actually came up with more than one video ago, I believe. Yeah, it was a while ago that we were actually still expecting further continuation lower, especially since within this initial movement to the downside, we did not manage to get into the area of support. And sure, within the white interpretation, we were actually considering even a possible bottom, but it was not particularly a high probability scenario, especially not as long as we did not have an initial 5-wave move to the upside, and as long as we were below the larger area of resistance for the green interpretation. And surely enough, we only got a 3-wave structure to the upside into only the first level of resistance before continuing here to the downside. Now, I want to make it very clear, this is not the only structure that can work out to the downside. The green interpretation is not the only movement that can actually work out, but it is probably one of my preferred interpretations, one of my preferred scenarios for this structure for this larger wave B in white, and we are going to focus still on this scenario until we get further evidence that we should be tracking a more different structure. Now, since we already have here the wave A and the wave B, we can actually start looking here for an ideal target for the larger wave C in the green scenario, and that would be the 100% extension of the wave A, which is around the $46.6 level. Although I want to make it very clear, again, this is an ideal target, yeah? We don't need to get there and we don't need to stop there, but it is a level that the wave C is generally drawn towards. Now, within this correction in the wave C, we expect to form a larger 5-wave move to the downside, and already we might have formed actually the largest and strongest wave of this entire movement to the downside. Although this comes with a fair warning that we may have realistically built here an internal series of 1-2 setups, where realistically we could have here even 4 or 5 1-2 setups. This would be a third wave down, a fourth wave up, and a fifth wave that would be unfolding to the downside. Now, within such a scenario, within such an interpretation, we would actually expect ideally to form a 4-5 structure for each of those 1-2 setups, and we may find a bottom earlier rather than later, yeah, sooner rather than later, but we will need to see a signal for such an interpretation as long as we hold here below internal areas of resistance for a third and a fourth, and yeah, so on for then the larger wave 3 and a larger wave 4. We will continue to track further continuation lower, where I would need a break above certain levels of resistance that would actually tell me that this structure has likely found a more significant low. And even internally within this wave C, I want to make it very clear, this is not the only way to actually track this structure. I could be considering here a 1-2, a third wave down, fourth wave up, and then a fifth wave to form a more significant bottom in a more direct fashion within an ending diagonal. Although, once again, I would need still a break above those resistance levels to outrule other scenarios that could allow this structure to extend even further, because I don't want to be calling a bottom when there is basically no evidence. Now, as I was mentioning, this area of support is interesting for us in terms of possible accumulation. We have here certain levels of structural support that can be very interesting, especially so here initially at the $66 level, this was the swing low before this very massive push to the upside. This could be a very interesting level to find some slowdown in this overall larger structure to the downside. It could also be the next one here, the $61 level, and then at the 50% retracement we have another structural support level. And as we move into those levels, we can look for an accumulation area and mark it even as an accumulation area. But what I would really want to focus on for a trade setup, because this is not a trade setup, yeah? If you're looking from a large time frame perspective, this structure that has formed is not a high indicator, a high probability indicator that this movement would extend higher from this area of support, and that we shouldn't necessarily focus on the internal structure, because we only have here a 3-wave move to the upside, yeah, maybe something like this, doesn't matter exactly, but my point is we are going to need to see here an internal 5-wave move to the upside within the wave C, yeah, the initial wave 1 up before we look for an interesting trade setup. Yeah, that would be the most significant level of confirmation that we can actually find at this point. And even though we are still decently far, very likely, from even starting this larger structure, this is what I am aiming for. This is what I'm looking for on the longer time frame for a trade setup on this chart. Now, we may find here even a smaller 1-2 setup, something like this, part of an even larger wave 1. Yeah, maybe something like this, a 1-2, then we get a third, fourth, and a fifth to build the larger wave 1. This could be interesting as well, but my main point is that we should be looking on this chart for confirmation, yeah, a initial tiny 5-wave move to the upside. That would be an initial confirmation before we look for a more high probability trade setup. And with that said, we can move here into the smaller time frame, into this wave C, where we will be discussing this structure mainly, yeah, a potential 1, 2, 3, fourth, and the fifth, where we are tracking the idea of an impulse to start filling in, but I don't want to get too much into it as this structure is still very much under development and it could take very many different paths, and yeah, especially in such a small time frame where the scenarios and the structures could morph from one interpretation to another. For example, I could even say this something like a 1-2, and the third wave that would actually still be ongoing, or even this to be a larger 1-2 and a very significant wave 3 still to come. At the moment, the momentum to the downside hasn't necessarily increased, but it could very easily do so, and I don't want to be calling any significant expectations in this area just yet. And the only thing that would actually allow a more clear indication that this structure to the downside is not to extend higher is, based on the current low at least, these levels or this area of resistance that would tell us that, yeah, sure, this wave 1 may be done and we have a very significant push higher. Well, I would need to see here still a break above this area of resistance for a signal that this structure is not going to extend even lower, yeah, where this could have been, again, just a larger wave 1 and we get a wave 2, and then a third wave is yet to come. And in this case, we are looking here at the levels between the $87.4 all the way up to the $104.2 level. Now, internally within this structure, it seems we are dealing with an ending diagonal within the wave 5. Yeah, this is preferred based on the internal structure, but again, we won't go into it, and we are still watching patiently from a larger time frame. And for now, these are the levels, this is the trade setup. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and let me know what else you want me to cover, and I'll do my best to do that in the days and weeks ahead. And until then, I hope you have a nice day, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.